Hello and welcome to another Tuesday Talk with Ruby Reese. But wait, it's not just another Tuesday Talk with Ruby Reese. We are talking about a really special topic, all because of Pride Month. Now, we're proud every single month, but it being June, we decided that we wanted to do something a little bit special. We wanted to talk a little bit about diversity, and what better topic to pick than sexual diversity in the animal kingdom. So we thought we need an expert. How did we track down an expert to chat all about this topic? But we were lucky enough to have our very own zoologist in our midst, in our own community of friends of Ruby Reese. We found Zoe that was only delighted to come on and chat with us all about this really, really broad, wild topic. So without further ado, I now would like to introduce the chat that I had with Zoe. Zoe, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Doing really well. Thank you so much for having me.
Would you do us the pleasure of introducing yourself briefly?
Hi, so I'm Zoe. I'm a zoologist, and I'm also Hugh Mom to Robert the Greyhound, a well-known figure in the area. But Bachelor's of Science, Zoology, UCC, and that's what we're here to talk about.
Amazing. And I'm really, really happy to be chatting with you about such a huge and complex topic. We're going to try and break it down a little bit. But I suppose we wanted to speak a little bit about sexual diversity, especially in the animal world. So what do we even mean by sexual diversity in animals?
Well, in a zoological sense, sexual diversity kind of covers a wide range of sexual behaviours, orientations and expressions. It includes things like pair bonds, both same-sex and opposite, courtship rituals, different forms of sexual expression, and that can include things as like gender roles or even changing sexes. It also, to some degree, covers things like parental investment of animals. All in all, it's a very huge topic that I think can often be simplified down too much, but it is huge.
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose there's no kind of real kind of beginning and end to the topic. So we're going to make quite a few generalizations in ourselves, maybe oversimplifications at times today. And I think that has to be okay. If people are interested, if we spark the interest of people in one particular area or other, we'll try and find some resources to help people. And you can go off on crazy rabbit hole journeys for yourselves, I think, to kind of discover these topics a little bit more. So first of all, some people might think that sexual diversity in animals is unnatural. What does science have to say about that?
Sexual diversity is one of the most natural parts of the animal kingdom. Humans are natural too. Whatever we have, they have. There's over 1,500 species of animals where different forms of sexual diversity, including primates, lions and birds, have been recorded. It's a huge part of social structures, kin bonds, it's a form of altruism. It's as natural as breathing when we talk about the kingdom around us.
Mm-hmm. And I think if we're talking about natural, I mean, what does natural mean? It means that, it occurs in nature. So if we're saying that animals do it in nature, then it is natural, right?
If the book says one thing, but the bird's doing another, you believe the bird. We have so many strict gender rules and conformities in the human mindset, but when you go outside and look around, instantly they'll start being broken. Sex, sexual diversity, it's as natural as anything. It's what the foundation of natural evolution is based on, and it's normal and natural for there to be changes and diversity within that.
Exactly. So we have to celebrate this diversity. And talking about research, I suppose, do we think that research in this field has been influenced heavily by human biases as well?
Massively so. In fact, one of the first studies on same-sex penguins was never published because it was considered to be depravity. Human biases, religious biases, social norms that haven't been challenged have impacted massively what science has done, what has been published, what research has been done. So it's only now in more modern times that we're re-evaluating an awful lot of assumed biases about the animal kingdom with new lenses and new viewpoints, and discovering, well, actually, things that we thought were set in stone, you're either male or female, is completely wrong. There's such a different spectrum of identities, orientations, expressions, diversity that has been biased by internal problems within human society. And I think the further we look into it, the more we realise, by examining the actual natural world and the diversity that can be found there, it explains an awful lot of problems that we have in human society in regards to LGBT rights, trans rights, human rights. We're all linked, and by ignoring one or shutting down one, we shut down the other. So follow the science and you'll find that there's a huge amount of openness and acceptedness to be found.
Absolutely. And I think in fairness to an awful lot of research in past centuries and even decades, I think so it sometimes wasn't their own bias that they weren't reporting what they saw, but you must remember that a scientific researcher needs funding. They need to be published. They have, they have hopes and aspirations for themselves to get promotions. They want to be respected among their peers. And sometimes if they're seen as, that gay monkey researcher, then it kind of pigeonholes them or they might perceive that if they publish things like that they might then be kind of earmarked with that label for the rest of their careers. And maybe in today's modern Western society that may or may not be okay, but if you look into the past, the huge consequences that might have been had for researchers. So I think it's only fair to point out that people may have rightly kind of decided to for the sake of their careers and for the sake of their further research, kind of like pushed things under the rug a little bit, and I think there's a lot to be found in unpublished research now from the past.
100%.
Yeah. So looking across species then, are we talking about like one or two identified species that we see sexual diversity out of what we might expect, and let's call it, I suppose, a spade a spade. What our expectation is when we're talking about sexual diversity is something that's not a male and a female having a sexual relationship, I suppose, is probably an interesting way.
The simplest way of kind of layman it down. It's a very complex matter, and I think if we try and go too broad, you could teach a whole university module on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
As it is, there have been hundreds, if not thousands. I think there's over 15,000 identified species where there's has been different forms of sexual diversity, and that occurs in a variety of forms. We have things like sexual societies, like bonobos, who use sex both bisexual, lesbian, gay and straight, essentially, as forms of social bonding for cohesion, to address conflicts. We have same-sex parents who adopt chicks, such as albatrosses or penguins. That's a very famous one. It's been seen in the zoos across the world and in the wild, successfully adopting and rearing chicks as same-sex couples. In almost 30% of albatross colonies, we see same-sex couples that are female-female or male-male, depending on mate scarcity. It's a natural part of the world, and we see it in so many different means. We see it in our livestock animals as well. There's a huge percentage of rams who have a same-sex preference for other rams. We see it in bulls too, in cattle. It's a natural part of the world around us, and it occurs in a huge variety of formats. For everything we think of in terms of LGBT, you'll find a matching correspondent in the animal kingdom, both singly and in social animals, although it is somewhat more common in social animals, which could then be linked into why we see it in humans more, as we are also a social animal.
And it's interesting that you point us out as a social animal as well, because I think we sometimes easily forget that humans are also an animal.
Yeah, like, social element aside, I know all of us like our alone time, but we are a social species. We are animals. We are part of the animal kingdom. We're often kept aside, at the top of the food chain or outside of nature, but humans are an animal. We're part of the great ape tree. We have naturally evolved on this planet. Have we maybe gone a bit too far? Some could argue. I think that's an argument for the anthropologists among us. But in terms of a zoological sense, as a biologist, humans are animals. We portray natural behaviours, and that includes a wide variety of sexual diversity, sexual orientations, different gender spectrums, and that has knock-on effects to our social skills, the way we find our pair bonds, the way we raise our kin. It's a form of altruism, funny enough, and I think anyone who has a gay aunt or uncle, you'll often find, stereotype aside, they're your favourite aunt or uncle because of a form of kin selection and altruism that we see across the animal kingdom, where a gay or lesbian family member can actually increase the success of rearing of nieces or nephews. And that's seen in humans, but also in the animal kingdom.
Definitely. And it's funny you say that, because I was reading a book a couple of years ago, and it was a species of fish, I believe it was a wrasse species, that had I think it was kind of like threesome relationships, basically, with two males and a female, where one male was sexually active with the female, but the other one really built the bond between both of the other two fish, and really helped out in raising the baby fish, and kind of showing them how to be a wrasse, or whatever parenting is needed in that species. So it's incredible to see us as humans as a social animal, and then our society putting kind of very clearly defined boxes then on what's expected and not expected, and then portraying that onto the rest of the animal community as well. And we're seeing more and more that neither all humans nor all animals fit neatly into these boxes. And talking about family structures as well, do you maybe want to talk a little bit about that, and how relationships are kind of family relationships are formed in the family or in the family units that we see in the animal kingdom, and maybe even where we see things like matriarchal societies, where where the ladies are very much running their societies.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of examples where maybe traditional human gender roles are completely flipped or even thrown out the window when we look back into the animal kingdom. There's examples of herds of gazelles that are male-female segregated, who come together solely for breeding, but still portray predominantly lesbian relationships within their herds. We have huge groups of animals who co-parent, like meerkats, who have a litter, and then everyone co-parents. There's polyamorous geese who have greater rearing success of young than monogamous geese. That's grey-lag geese. There's loads of examples of that across the world. And then we have further things like matriarchal societies in things like hyenas, which I think are a great example of sexual diversity, because it's a matriarchal society where the females are what we could almost call masculinized. They have high levels of testosterone. They have external genitalia that almost resemble peni, compared to then the smaller males, who are a lot less down the food chain in that pack, and have to essentially ask for consent to mate with the females. In other matriarchal societies like orcas, we see a different dynamic, in where you've got a very close-knit family group. The females lead the way, and the males are left to stick with the family for life, which is the opposite of what we often see in human societies. Off you go, find your own family, lead your path. If you try and apply human norms to different rearing, courtship rituals, and actual minding of young, you'll find that it all goes out the window. It's a very set in stone way. You've got your mammy, your daddy, and your two kids on your white picket fence. That doesn't work in the animal kingdom. You might get the odd one out there, won't pretend that they don't see these examples, but in the animal kingdom, homosexuality behaviour, single moms, and co-parenting is a lot more common.
Yeah. And it's really, really interesting. It's lovely to hear this kind of natural diversity that's out there. Isn't it fascinating to think about all these different ways of animals looking at their own societies and how they're built. It's really, really interesting. And you mentioned a little bit about the lesbian and the gay particular and the bisexual even relationships. Are there some animals that we know that change sex during their lives as well?
There are a number of documented animals, particularly in fish. I think the famous one an awful lot of people are aware of is clownfish, many of which are born male. But in clownfish, you have a dominant female and then a semi-dominant male who's generally surrounded by less dominant male. If something happens to the female, the dominant male steps up and he becomes mammy. There's opposites seen in an animal that you mentioned earlier, wrasses, who are predominantly born female and can transition to male later on. And then there's other cases like ribbonfish, where they transition throughout their life. They're born essentially asexual, and then throughout their lifespan develop into male and then female, with the females guarding the eggs until death. It goes to show that there is a binary of different gender identities. And some studies on clownfish have actually shown that before they've externally changed genitalia, internally in their brain chemistry, they've changed sex. Which I think is a nice way of kind of streamlining in that your brain sex might not match your physical sex at many points in your life. You can have a female brain and male gonads. So essentially we have trans fish in a nice simplified form of that. It is a very complex matter. I think it's something that you kind of have to simplify down. You could spend hours looking into the chemistry of it. But animals change sex throughout their life. It might not be the most common, but it's also not the most common in human society. And I think in particular in recent years, there's been a lot of drama and blaming of the trans community, who make up less than 1% of the global population. There's more people with green eyes than there are trans people.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It might not be the most common thing to see in the animal kingdom, but it's also not the most common thing to see in our human society.
Exactly.
But it is still natural.
Exactly, it's natural, and I think you hit the nail on the head by saying drama, because I think for most people, I think they don't want any of this drama, and I'm sure that the fish definitely don't want drama. They're all just trying to get on with it and they're trying to swim upriver, or you're trying to get your job as a human, or whatever, do whatever you got to do. I think that the drama is something that works well for tabloids, but not for day-to-day life. So it's worth keeping in mind that a lot of this is actually seen in the natural world, and the fish just get on with it. So maybe we could as well.
Maybe we should.
Yeah, exactly. And I was actually reading something, and I don't really know much about the gender of oysters, but I think I read something recently as well, not sure about the source, that they can also change gender. I think even like seasonally or on an annual basis.
They can change their gender multiple times throughout their lifespan, which, okay, I don't know many trans people who might go from male to female, back to female to male, back to male to female, but it does happen in the animal kingdom. Transitions do occur. They are natural. They are normal. There's nothing unnatural about a sex change in any form. It's one of those things, as I said earlier, it is overhyped in the media. I think it's a lot of blame is thrown onto the LGBT community as a whole, but particularly the trans community. There's nothing unnatural about it. It is as natural as breathing. These things occur, and to try and marginalize them down into, it goes against God's will, you start becoming sensationalized, dramatized. It becomes a problem then, when in the vast majority, like you said, are just trying to live their lives. Let them live their lives.
Exactly, absolutely. And I wonder, in an evolutionary context as well, does sexual diversity play a role there?
Massively so. Sexual diversity, different courtship rituals, they're all survival tactics. They can help form social cohesion amongst packs. There's a reason for them all. We see it in some really unexpected ways sometimes. We have male seahorses who carry and bird the young, but then we have jacana birds where the females defend the territory and the males are left back minding the nest. There's reasons for these behaviours, and you'll often find you have to go into a kind of deeper evolutionary ecology kind of sense to find out why. But in each individual case, there is a reason. For hens, for example, if there's no rooster around, well, then you'll often find that one more dominant hen will develop more deep wattle, they'll become more territorial, they'll step up because it fills that gap in an awful lot of albatross communities where you have mate scarcity. These are monogamous animals, they mate for life. So for that social bond, that need for a partner, they'll pair up with a same-sex partner. There's reasons for it. It's predominantly social cohesion. It can really help with just overall mental health, almost, in a way, particularly for the monogamous animals, and that includes humans. There's a reason we see these behaviours. They evolve to fill niches and to fill necessary niches for survival.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be gay is to be survival.
Definitely, and I think it shows as well, that all of this has developed over millennia, right? Evolution, you have to look at a kind of on the long-term spectrum and see, the species and the behaviours that tend to become ingrained and are from those that survive. So obviously these are strategies that have worked and, have worked for that species for, definitely more than yesterday or today. It's like kind of going back thousands, hundreds of thousands and millions of years. So it's fascinating to see that this type of diversity and these type of what we might see as unusual family structures and all that kind of play a completely important and valid role in the survival of that species as well.
It's referred to as convergent evolution when we see the same traits, body plans or life histories reoccurring across multiple different species. We see homosexual behaviour, same-sex pair bonds occurring across the animal kingdom because it works. If a body plan doesn't work, it dies out. There's a reason we don't see any of those mad Cenozoic creations anymore. We don't see body plans that occurred in the Mesolithic explosions. I don't see them anymore because they didn't work.
Yeah.
What we do see, though, is things like, look at our canines. We can see foxes, wolves, lions, tigers, bears. Throw in the felines there. That body plan works for a predator.
Yeah.
When these things work, they keep reoccurring, even when the species go extinct. So to see essentially LGBT relationships, polyamorous relationships, co-parenting, there's a reason why they keep popping up, and that's because they are evolutionarily successful. Some might argue they aren't reproducing sexually, which therefore defeats the point of reproduction and evolution. But there's also then the side of kin selection. If I don't reproduce, but I can help my sister, who is reproducing, therefore that's me choosing to help her. So what if I pair up with another one just to keep me comfortable and mentally happy with a social bond? That's where you see the form of altruism. I think when we think of altruism in humans, we think, oh, I'm choosing to be good. But it's not as complex in animals. Think of ants. They all choose to look after one breeding queen. That's a form of altruism.
And just to throw in my little bit of pseudoscience here as well into the mix, you mentioned helping a sibling, and this again was a piece of research that I read years and years ago, talking about genetics and passing on genetics. You as a parent pass on, obviously, on average 50% of your genes to the next generation. If you help a sibling raise their children, you share 50% also with your sibling. So that means that you could see it that if you help a sibling raise two children, you're actually passing on the same amount of genetic material from your blood lineage as you would be having your own child, so it's it does make sense from a genetic perspective as well. And I'm not sure if I explained that kind of in a half scientific way, but
simple way of referring to kin selection, which is what I was trying to get my head around.
Yeah.
We see it in a lot of animals. You can see it where some previous offspring, will help look after the young. We see that in meerkats. We see that in jays, blue jays. It is a form of choosing to help your kin, which in an awful lot of species where we do see this level of kin selection, we also see pair bonds that are same sex. So there is a link there. It's an altruistic link. But again, back to natural evolution, convergent evolution, that's why it keeps occurring, because it is successful. It's a successful life plan. So it keeps popping up.
And This is really interesting as well, because I know we kind of have an obsession in our kind of, patriarchal world to focus on the males. So let's do it for a second, where we're talking about animals where there's kind of, this alpha, beta male structures where one male in a grouping is tends to be the main breeding male, where the others kind of help out with the rest of the family structure. We see this quite a bit as well in the animal world, right? Or do we just obsess about it because we live in a patriarchal society? I'm not sure.
We do see it, but we also see the opposite.
Yeah.
Because the animal kingdom is so diverse and so huge and ever changing, you'll find different life histories and different life paths of all kinds. You'll get your classic lion pride, harem kind of style thing, big alpha male, pack of females around them. But then we also see all female lion prides with a masculinized head lioness who even develops a mane and will do mounting behaviors on other female lions. So even in animals where we see this behavior, this kind of classic patriarchal thing, big alpha male, rest of the pack, we still see variation. Even in other great apes, we see this variation. You might still have your big silverback gorilla, but there's always going to be a case study where you find an all-female troop.
Yeah. Okay.
In other primates, we have, again, back to the bonobos, who are probably one of the most hypersexual society. They use sex as a form of just communication. You get less dominant males performing the dominant act in sex on more dominant males, solely as a form of communication. It might be over a bickering about food. They're probably the most bisexual, pansexual troop out there is bonobos. And I think anyone who's curious into seeing what that level of sexual communication can look like, there's 110 different documentaries and studies out there, well worth a watch.
And actually, you're raising an interesting question here as well, because obviously we're talking quite a lot about sex for procreation, but you brought up something that maybe might verge on sex for fun. Do we see sex for pleasure in the animal world?
We do in some what we refer to as higher animals. Now, it's not a very accepted term, higher animals. There's an awful lot of debate about that. But I think one of the best examples is in cetaceans, in dolphins. Bottlenose dolphins are known to stimulate each other for non-reproductive reasons. And we see that in both same-sex and in opposite-sex couples. In particular, actually, there's an awful lot of male pair bonds in dolphins who will roam the oceans and may occasionally come across a female to mate with, but then go back right at it with their bestie, their best friend. Off they go into the ocean together. They're only friends, but they're doing a little bit more than that, friends with benefits kind of situation, because they might not be reproducing sexually, but they are intelligent enough to understand there's more than just sex for making a baby.
Yeah.
So we do see sex for fun or sex for non-reproductive reason across the animal kingdom.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that the animals are also enjoying themselves. It's the main thing. And going a little bit back to, so it was, we had these very convenient kind of examples of gorillas and lions where you do have the alpha males, and that works for certain kind of narratives in society. But I suppose there's also worthwhile examples of kind of what we would imagine to be quite effeminate behaviour being expressed in loads and loads of animals, like peacocks being a wonderful example of those males, with their amazing plumage, and they are out there strutting their stuff, showing off to the females. And I think we see quite a lot of this in the animal world, not just to how they dress, but also, the bird song, and I'm sure there's loads of examples, is there?
I think that kind of comes into human viewpoints on these things. Things like male ornamentation, those very big, bright peacock feathers, singing. These are kind of things that are thought to be feminine, but are again, as natural as breathing for most of these animals, and in particular in form of male ornamentation, for the males of the species to be bright and flamboyant, little drag kings running around the forest trying to find their women. We see it in a huge amount of birds in particular. Birds are well known for their bird song, their singing to attract mates, to defend territory, for their ornamentation. Peacocks being probably the best example, but a huge amount of paradise bird, for example. There was a couple of really interesting studies where they physically changed the length of the tail feathers in some of the males to see if it affected mate choice. And funny enough, it did.
Oh, wow.
You make them too long, the bird can't fly anymore. Females won't choose them. You make them too short, they're not worth looking at. So we see these feminine traits across the animal kingdom, but they're not feminine. We as humans have decided anything pretty and girly isn't worth doing. But it's, again, a natural part of evolution, and there's a reason these things occur. Flashy birds, they might not be the easiest to hide in the jungle and get away from their predators, but they do have increased mating success. So flashy, breaking the gender norms, vibrant clothing is back in fashion for mate selection this year, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so nice to hear the different kind of examples and see how much diversity is out there, and that there certainly isn't kind of a black and white across the animal kingdom, and that some things work for certain species and other things work for others. But also, like you mentioned, there's diversity even within different groups within the same species. So that lots of different things can work, I suppose, is probably a good takeaway here.
The only thing black and white in the animal kingdom is coat colour. There is such a diversity across the entire animal kingdom, across the entire natural world. Even if you start going outside of animals into plants, the whole idea of your chromosomes are either XY or XX, or male or female, goes out the window. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of recognised sexes at a chromosomal level, let alone a physical level, across the natural world. So if you try and put things in boxes and go black, white, you're going to end up a fool, because it's not the way the world works.
Absolutely. And I think I read something as well relatively recently about chromosomes that we didn't always have XX and XY. I think there was like let's say an XZ or a YZ variation that was around. I think kind of over time the chromosomes can kind of change as well, even in humans, right?
Across the animal kingdom, XX and XY are human sex chromosomes, but they vary across the animal kingdom.
Yeah,
they're not XX and XY in all animals. They vary to all different letters of the alphabet.
Yeah.
So even as Homo sapiens evolved, those chromosomes were changing and varying across the way. So your chromosomes, people kind of put a lot of stress on them as, oh my God, they make you, without taking into account that they're a product of evolution, and that we are more than just a couple of letters on a piece of paper.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's the important thing to note, is that, you know, these things are more fluid than we'd like to believe, and that they don't fit into the niche boxes that we'd like them to sometimes. And I suppose that's an interesting intro as well into my next point that I wanted to ask about is, you know, has studying animals changed how we think about human sexuality?
In the more modern studies, yes.
Yeah.
As we mentioned earlier, some of the historic studies were quite skewed by human biases, and actually served to often reinforce those biases solely by product of not publishing contracting data. But in more recent studies, in more recent viewpoints of the world, when we look at nature through a broad lens, when you believe the bird, not the book, you start to develop a better understanding of just how fluid and diverse and changing everything is. And that includes human sexual orientation, behaviours, lineages, societal pressures. That goes again into the anthropologists, but we'll leave them at that. By approaching the natural world with an open lens, you can learn so much that then comes right back into your own viewpoint about everyday life as a human.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Absolutely.
you'll often find those people who are science deniers, that anti-intellectualize, those who, it's all in your DNA, it's basic biology. They don't understand the more complex side of it, so therefore they write it all off.
Yeah.
And I think that does contribute to the rise of not just, transphobia, homophobia, but an awful lot of other societal issues
Yeah.
that spread across the board. Racism, misogyny, they're all interconnected with this rise of just not believing science. And as science changes, we learn more and more.
Absolutely.
It's fluid. Science consistently changes, and science is diverse. And guess what? So is life. And that includes us humans.
Absolutely. And do you think as well that I know you hinted at the answer already, but do you think science, particularly in the area, I suppose, apart from human sexuality, but also in animal sexual diversity, do you think the research has actually changed here? And I know you mentioned that past studies used to be very biased by humans. Do you think we're moving in the right direction with research, at least?
All in all, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Are there a few scientists and scientific groups that maybe are a little bit too set in stone? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That links back to the comments you had earlier about funding and who's making these studies up, who's going and helping these scientists go out there. But all in all, there is a very positive shift towards more open-mindedness, more inclusivity, and that's not just buzzwords, that's fact.
Mm-hmm.
The science that is coming back then, the research that's coming back, the observations are all going to reinforce the fact that everything is diverse. There is no set in stone. The more we study these creatures, the more we learn about the reason for it, the evolutionary reasons behind it, as well as the point of them. And the thing is, you don't need to have a point, but not a lot of them do, which completely blows out of the water the arguments of it's unnatural and being gay is a choice. The science is growing in the field, and it's all saying the same. There is such a huge diversity of sexual behaviours and orientations, and it is completely and utterly natural.
Absolutely. And I think that is probably the biggest takeaway from the whole topic, right? Isn't it? It's that that there's diversity out there, and it's something that we should probably try to embrace and kind of see such value from it.
It's something that needs to be celebrated, because to be diverse is to be evolving, is to be social, it's to be human, it's to be natural and part of this planet. Without diversity, life would have died 1,000,000 years ago.
Absolutely. Love that ending. That was so succinct and wraps everything up, and I think gives people the right feels as well. And I'm sure loads and loads of people will now be intrigued by bonobos and wrasse and all sorts of different animals. So I'm delighted that we could start motivating people to go off and do a bit of independent research. We might put a couple of research papers and resources into the show notes as well, so that people can have a further little bit of a look. I know it's been a huge topic to take on. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting, and really intriguing me with all the different stories about sexual diversity in animals. Zoe, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Happy Pride.
Thank you. Happy Pride. And once again, a huge thank you to Zoe for coming on and sharing such exciting examples and nuggets of information from a really, really important topic. My mind has been blown. My eyes have been opened. There is diversity all around us if we are only open enough to take in that information. So definitely something to be celebrated. I love to see the rainbow of different family structures and ways of building societies and living out lives in the animal world. It's really, really inspiring. So we, of course, wish you all a lovely Pride Month, and Cork Pride is actually not on until August, so we'll be celebrating here longer than the average person. But of course, Pride is every month anyway, so keep that torch burning. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about Zoe and her lovely greyhound, Robert the Greyhound, as well as, of course, Ruby Reese and dognutrition.ie. We'll have all of our social media handles in the show notes, as well as our websites, and of course some of those resources that we promised as well. Happy Pride, everyone. Keep smiling, and we will be back to you with yet another Tuesday Talk podcast next week.